The council chamber of the Galactic Consortium stretched across 3 kilometers of polished obsidian, its ceiling lost in artificial clouds that flickered with the bioluminescent thoughts of the assembled delegates. Representatives from 437 species sat in perfect geometric harmony, their various forms creating a living mandala of galactic civilization. At the chamber's heart stood the accusation podium, where humanity's crime would be formally declared. Supreme Arbiter Veltar of the crystalline hegemony raised her 6 arms, each gesture creating musical notes that resonated through the chamber's acoustic dampeners. The universal translators hummed to life, converting her silicon-based language into meaning that every species could understand. We gather today to address the most dangerous threat our galaxy has ever known, Veltar announced, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. A species so chaotic, so unpredictable, that their very existence threatens the order we have spent millennia perfecting. The chamber filled with clicking, buzzing, and harmonic agreements from the assembled delegates. The Zephyrian cloud dancers swirled in agitated patterns, while the deep space thinkers pulsed their massive brains in synchronized disapproval. Humanity, Veltar continued, has been members of our consortium for exactly 47 standard cycles. In that brief time, they have disrupted 17 trade agreements, challenged 31 established precedents, and introduced concepts so foreign to civilized thought that our legal scholars have required psychiatric care. Ambassador Kreeth of the Hive Collective buzzed his agreement. They question everything. Everything. When we explained that the Thorian mining rights had been established for 8,000 years, they asked why. When we showed them the sacred precedents of commercial law, they asked who decided this. It is madness. The assembled delegates created a symphony of agreement. The ethereal wisps dimmed in shared concern, while the rockborn elders made grinding sounds of disapproval. But their greatest crime, Veltar's voice rose to a crescendo, is their insistence on something they call individual rights. They claim that every single being, regardless of species origin or social standing, possesses inherent worth that cannot be negotiated away. The chamber erupted in horrified gasps and shocked exclamations. Several delegates had to be physically restrained by their security details. Preposterous, shrieked Elder Vox of the Temporal Collectors. Rights are earned through contribution to the greater order. Rights are granted by those with wisdom to dispense them. Rights cannot simply exist, yet humans insist they do, Veltar replied grimly. They have introduced concepts like due process, presumption of innocence, and burden of proof. They demand that accusations be supported by evidence rather than authority. They question the wisdom of their betters. The silk spinner empress raised her delicate forelimb. Supreme Arbiter, surely these are merely cultural quirks. Perhaps with proper education. We tried education, Veltar interrupted. We sent our finest legal scholars to explain proper galactic law. The humans listened politely, then asked to see the mathematical models proving the effectiveness of our justice system. When we explained that mathematics was irrelevant to matters of law, they laughed. A shudder ran through the chamber. Laughter was considered the most disrespectful response possible in civilized discourse. They demanded statistical analysis of conviction rates, demographic breakdowns of sentencing patterns, and peer-reviewed studies on rehabilitation effectiveness. They wanted to measure justice as if it were some kind of science. The horror speakers from the deep reaches began their ritual chanting, calling upon their ancient gods to protect them from such blasphemy. But their final insult, Veltar's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the vast chamber, came when they asked to review the legal frameworks that govern this very consortium. They claimed they had a right to understand the laws that bound them. The silence that followed was profound. Even the ever-present hum of the translation system seemed muted. Therefore, Veltar continued, we have gathered to pass the resolution of exclusion. Humanity will be declared a rogue species, banned from all consortium space, forbidden from participating in galactic civilization. They will be quarantined to their home system until they learn proper respect for established order. The vote was unanimous. 437 species agreed that humanity posed too great a threat to civilized society to be allowed freedom among the stars. But as the delegates filed out, discussing the wisdom of their decision, None of them noticed the small recording device that had been transmitting everything to Earth. None of them realized that humanity had been expecting this exact outcome. In a small office on Earth, Ambassador Sarah Chen turned off the transmission feed and smiled. She had spent 2 years studying galactic law not to comply with it, but to understand its weaknesses. What the consortium saw as humanity's greatest flaw, their questioning nature, was about to become their greatest strength. "Well, that's that," she said to her legal team. "They've just given us everything we need." Her chief counsel, Marcus Webb, looked up from his notes. "The exclusion order?" "More than that," Sarah replied. "They've just demonstrated that the entire consortium legal system is based on authority rather than justice, tradition rather than truth, and fear rather than wisdom. They've handed us the perfect case for why their system needs to be replaced." "Replaced with what?" Sarah looked out the window at the busy streets of Geneva, where humans of every background went about their daily lives under a system of laws that, while imperfect, at least tried to treat every individual with dignity. "With something better," she said quietly. "With justice that doesn't depend on who you know or where you were born. With laws that can be questioned, tested, and improved. With a system that serves everyone, not just those in power." The consortium thought they had solved their human problem. They had no idea they had just started a revolution that would transform the galaxy forever. The exclusion order would take effect in 30 days. Humanity had exactly that long to prepare their response. It would be enough. The Global Legal Assembly had never seen anything like it. Representatives from every nation on Earth, along with the finest legal minds humanity could gather, crowded into the United Nations building in New York. Translators worked overtime as arguments raged in dozens of languages. But somehow, impossibly, consensus was emerging. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood before the assembled crowd, her voice carrying over the din. "The consortium believes they can simply vote us out of existence," she declared. "They think that because we ask uncomfortable questions, we're too dangerous for their perfect little galaxy." "And they're right," added Professor Elena Vasquez from the International Court of Justice. "We are dangerous. We're dangerous to any system built on unquestioned authority and inherited power." The assembly hall buzzed with agreement. In the past 30 days, humanity had done something unprecedented in galactic history. They had conducted a complete audit of consortium law. Dr. James Liu, head of the Earth Legal Research Division, stepped to the podium with a stack of documents that seemed impossibly thick. "We've analyzed every legal precedent, every court decision, every ruling the consortium has made in the past 1,000 years, he announced. "The results are illuminating." He activated the holographic display that dominated the center of the hall. Charts and graphs filled the air, showing patterns that made the assembled lawyers gasp in recognition. In 87% of trade disputes, the ruling favored the species with the oldest membership in the consortium. Liu continued. In criminal cases, species with crystalline-based biology received sentences that averaged 43% lighter than carbon-based life forms. And in disputes involving territorial rights, the verdict could be predicted with 96% accuracy simply by checking which party had contributed more to the consortium's operating budget in the previous decade. The hall erupted in outraged murmurs. These patterns were invisible to those within the system, but obvious to anyone analyzing the data objectively. "But here's the most telling statistic," Liu said, his voice growing serious. "In the entire recorded history of consortium law, not a single ruling has ever been overturned, reconsidered, or even questioned. They have achieved a perfect legal system, perfectly unchanging, perfectly biased, and perfectly corrupt." Justice Kwame Osei from Ghana's Supreme Court stood up. "This isn't law," he said firmly. "This is administrative tyranny dressed up in fancy robes. Real law evolves, adapts, corrects its mistakes. What they have is fossilized prejudice." "Which brings us to our response," Sarah Chen said, taking the podium again. "The consortium thinks they can exclude us through a simple majority vote. But there's a problem with their approach. They violated their own laws to do it." The holographic display shifted to show the consortium charter, the founding document that established galactic law. Ancient symbols glowed in the air as translation algorithms worked to convert the text into human languages. Article 12 of the Consortium Charter, Sarah read aloud. "No member species may be expelled without due process. including the right to present a defense, the right to examine evidence, and the right to appeal any decision. The hall went silent as the implications sank in. They never gave us a trial, Sarah continued. They never allowed us to present evidence in our defense. They simply voted based on their fear of our questions. By their own laws, the exclusion order is invalid. Chief Justice Roberts of the United States Supreme Court leaned forward. You're saying we can challenge this in their own courts? Not just challenge it, Sarah replied with a smile. We're going to demand a full trial, with all the rights their own charter guarantees, and we're going to use that trial to put their entire legal system on trial. The next speaker was Dr. Amara Okafor, a constitutional scholar from Nigeria. We've prepared something they've never seen before, she announced. A comprehensive alternative legal framework based on human jurisprudence. We call it the Universal Justice Protocol. She gestured, and the holographic display filled with a new document, its structure elegant and logical. It incorporates the best elements from every human legal tradition. Common law's flexibility, civil law's clarity, customary law's cultural sensitivity, and constitutional law's protection of fundamental rights. But the real innovation, added Dr. Chen Wei from Beijing University, is the integration of restorative justice principles. Instead of simply punishing wrongdoing, the system focuses on healing harm and preventing future conflicts. Justice Osei nodded approvingly, and it includes mechanisms for continuous review and improvement. The law isn't carved in stone, it's a living document that grows wiser with experience. The assembly began to understand the magnitude of what they were proposing. This wasn't just a defense of humanity's right to exist in galactic society. It was an offer to revolutionize galactic society itself. The consortium has ruled through fear and tradition for millennia, Sarah Chen said. They maintain order by ensuring no one can question their decisions. But they've made a critical error. They've given us a legal forum to present our case. Ambassador Yuki Tanaka from Japan raised her hand. What if they refuse to honor their own charter? What if they simply ignore our legal challenge? Sarah's smile grew wider. Then they'll have proven our point better than any argument we could make. A legal system that abandons its own principles when convenient isn't a legal system at all. It's a protection racket. The final speaker of the day was unexpected. Captain Maria Santos, former military officer turned peace negotiator. Make no mistake, she said firmly, this isn't just about law. This is about showing the galaxy what justice looks like when it serves everyone, not just the powerful. She gestured to the diverse crowd of humans in the assembly hall. Every color, every culture, every background represented. Look around this room. Every one of us comes from societies that had to learn the hard way that true justice requires constant vigilance, constant questioning, constant improvement. We've made mistakes, she continued. Terrible mistakes. But we learned from them. We built systems that could be challenged, corrected, and improved. That's what we're offering the galaxy. Not perfection, but the possibility of getting better. As the assembly session ended, the decision was unanimous. Humanity would not accept exclusion quietly. They would demand their day in court, and they would use that day to offer the galaxy something it had never known. Justice that could be questioned without punishment, law that served all beings equally, and a legal system that grew stronger through challenge rather than weaker. The consortium had 30 days to respond to humanity's formal legal challenge. In those 30 days, human legal scholars worked around the clock, preparing not just to defend humanity's rights, but to demonstrate a better way forward. They had no idea that their challenge would ultimately transform the galaxy, one precedent at a time. The consortium's Grand Tribunal had not convened for 3 centuries. The massive courtroom, built into the hollow core of an asteroid, stretched across dimensions that hurt the mind to contemplate. Crystalline formations grew from the walls like frozen lightning, each one recording and amplifying the proceedings for posterity. Supreme Arbiter Veltar occupied the central judgment seat, her crystalline form radiating disapproval. Around her, in precise hierarchical order, sat the Tribunal Council, 13 beings representing the oldest and most powerful species in the galaxy. None of them had expected to be here today. This proceeding is highly irregular, Veltar announced, her harmonic voice creating uncomfortable resonances in the chamber. The exclusion of a species requires no trial. The vote was legitimate and final. At the defendant's platform, Ambassador Sarah Chen stood with quiet confidence. Behind her, a small team of human lawyers arranged their materials with methodical precision. The sight of physical documents seemed to amuse the gallery of alien observers. "Supreme Arbiter," Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the translation systems. "We're not here to dispute the vote. We're here to demonstrate that the vote itself violated the consortium charter." The murmur that rippled through the gallery sounded like breaking glass. No one had ever accused the consortium of violating its own laws. Arbiter Veltar's form flickered with indignation. "The charter provides for the exclusion of dangerous species." The vote was overwhelming. "The charter also provides for due process," Sarah replied calmly. "Article 12, subsection 4 specifically states that no member species may face expulsion without the opportunity to present evidence in their defense." She gestured, and a holographic display materialized above the defendant's platform. The charter's text appeared in the original crystalline script, then translated into dozens of languages simultaneously. "We were never given that opportunity," Sarah continued. "The vote was held without notice, without hearing, without any chance for humanity to respond to the accusations made against us." Elder Thekmor of the ancient depths stirred in his massive tank, his tentacles creating bioluminescent patterns of disdain. "The accusations were self-evident," he bubbled through his translator. "Your species' disruption of galactic order required no further proof." "With respect, Elder Thekmor," Sarah replied, "that's exactly the problem. In any legitimate legal system, no accusation is considered self-evident. Evidence must be presented, examined, and tested." She nodded to her team, and Dr. Liu stepped forward with a portable display unit. "We'd like to present our analysis of the charges made against humanity." The Tribunal Council exchanged what passed for glances among their various species. This was unprecedented territory. No one had ever demanded to analyze charges in a consortium proceeding. "The first accusation," Dr. Liu began, "was that humanity disrupted 17 trade agreements. Let's examine the nature of these disruptions." The holographic display filled with contract documents, trade routes, and economic data. In every case, humanity simply asked to see the mathematical models supporting the trade terms. "We questioned why certain routes required payment to species who didn't own the star systems in question." Councillor Vexai of the Trade Federation buzzed angrily. "Those payment structures have existed for millennia. They are traditional." "Exactly," Dr. Liu replied. "But tradition isn't the same as legitimacy. When we traced the origins of these payments, we discovered that most began as tribute to prevent piracy. The pirates are long gone, but the payments continued out of habit." The gallery stirred uneasily. This was the kind of questioning that made the consortium nervous. "The second accusation," Dr. Liu continued, "was that we challenged 31 established precedents. Let's look at what those precedents actually established." The display shifted to show a series of legal cases. In every instance, humanity simply asked for the reasoning behind the decisions. "We wanted to understand the principles being applied." "Precedent requires no explanation," declared Magistrate Zurin of the Logical Collective. "The decision of previous tribunals is sufficient justification." "That's where we disagree," Sarah interjected, returning to the podium. "In human legal systems, precedent must be based on sound reasoning. If the reasoning is flawed, the precedent can be challenged and corrected." She gestured again, and the display showed a complex tree structure. "This is how precedent works in human law. Each decision builds on previous ones, but only when the underlying logic remains sound. When circumstances change or errors are discovered, the law evolves." Arbiter Veltar's form pulsed with agitation. "You speak of law as if it were some kind of living thing, constantly changing. Law must be stable, predictable, unchanging." "Must it?" Sarah asked quietly. "Let me ask the tribunal a question. How many innocent beings have been punished under consortium law?" The silence that followed was profound. The concept of questioning consortium justice was so foreign that several translators actually malfunctioned. "That question is irrelevant," Veltar finally replied. "Consortium justice does not make errors." "How do you know?" Sarah pressed. "Have you ever checked? Have you ever reviewed old cases to see if new evidence might change the verdict? Have you ever asked whether your methods produce just outcomes?" Dr. Elena Vasquez stepped forward with another display. "We analyzed 1,000 randomly selected consortium legal cases from the past century," she announced. In 23% of those cases, the evidence would not meet even the most basic standards of human jurisprudence. The gallery erupted in shocked exclamations. The idea that consortium justice could be measured and found wanting was revolutionary. Furthermore, Elena continued, in cases involving species bias, what humans call discrimination, the patterns are statistically undeniable. Justice in the consortium depends heavily on what species you are, how long your people have been members, and how much economic power you wield. These are serious accusations, rumbled Elder Techmore. Do you claim the consortium is corrupt? We claim the consortium is human, Sarah replied, then caught herself. I mean fallible. Every system created by intelligent beings contains the possibility of error, bias, and corruption. The question is whether the system includes mechanisms to detect and correct these problems. She turned to address the full tribunal. Human legal systems aren't perfect. We've made terrible mistakes, caused great injustices, perpetuated awful wrongs. But we learned something from our failures. We learned to build systems that could be questioned, challenged, and improved. Professor Chenwei stepped forward with the final display. We'd like to present our alternative, he announced. A legal framework that incorporates the best of both human and galactic jurisprudence. The Universal Justice Protocol materialized in the center of the chamber, its elegant structure drawing surprised attention from even the most hostile observers. This system maintains the stability the consortium values, Chen explained, while incorporating the flexibility and accountability that humanity requires. Decisions are based on clear principles that can be examined and tested. Precedents are respected but not worshipped. Most importantly, the system includes mechanisms for continuous improvement. Arbiter Veltar studied the display with reluctant interest. You propose to replace millennia of legal development with, what, human theories? We propose to enhance millennia of legal development with proven methods for ensuring justice, Sarah replied. The consortium has achieved impressive stability, but stability without justice isn't order, it's stagnation. The tribunal members conferred among themselves in a symphony of alien languages. Finally, Veltar spoke. You have presented interesting arguments, she admitted grudgingly, but the consortium requires time to consider these proposals. We will recess for deliberation. As the tribunal filed out, Sarah turned to her team with quiet satisfaction. They had done something unprecedented. They had forced the consortium to question itself. The real test would come next, when the galaxy's most powerful beings would have to decide whether justice was worth the discomfort of change. The emergency alert that interrupted the tribunal's deliberations was unprecedented in its scope. 3 sectors away from the courthouse asteroid, a massive cargo ship had exploded in the Nexus trade station, killing 47 beings and injuring over 200 more. The blast had damaged critical life support systems, putting thousands of lives at risk. Within hours, the perpetrator was identified, Kethvi Mordak, a young Zephyrian whose family had lost their trading license due to a recent consortium ruling. Security footage showed him placing the explosive device, and his suicide note clearly stated his motives. The case should have been simple. Under consortium law, terrorism carried only one penalty: immediate execution followed by financial punishment for the perpetrator's family and clan. The legal machinery moved swiftly. Mordak's clan would face generations of debt, and his species would be forever marked as producing a terrorist. But something unexpected happened. Ambassador Sarah Chen, who had been waiting in quarters near the courthouse, received an urgent communication from Captain Maria Santos aboard the human embassy ship. The Zephyrian government had made an unprecedented request. They wanted human legal assistance. They're asking for help? Sarah couldn't hide her surprise as she stood in the embassy ship's communication center. Captain Santos nodded grimly. The Zephyrian ambassador contacted us directly. She says they've reviewed our legal proposals and want to see how human justice would handle this case. Dr. Liu looked up from his datapad, confusion clear on his face. But the case is already decided under consortium law. Mordak's guilt is established. The sentence is mandatory. That's exactly the problem, came a new voice. Ambassador Silith of the Zephyrian Collective had been granted permission to board the human ship, another unprecedented event. Her translucent form flickered with agitation as she addressed the humans. The consortium wants to execute not just Mordak, but the future of his entire bloodline, she explained, her musical voice heavy with despair. 43 innocent beings will spend their lives paying for his crime. Their children and their children's children will bear this mark forever. Sarah studied the alien ambassador carefully. But you must have known this when you joined the consortium. These are the established penalties. We accepted them because we had no choice, Silith replied. But your presentation to the tribunal, it suggested there might be another way, a way that serves justice without destroying the innocent. Professor Elena Vasquez stepped forward. You want us to demonstrate the universal justice protocol in a real case? More than that, Silith said softly. We want to understand if human justice can heal instead of just punish. The next 6 hours were a whirlwind of activity. The human legal team, working with Zephyrian officials, established a temporary tribunal aboard the embassy ship. The consortium was informed that the Zephyrians were exercising their right to internal species justice before accepting galactic judgment. It was technically legal, but barely. The makeshift courtroom was unlike anything the galaxy had seen. Instead of the rigid hierarchy of consortium courts, humans arranged the space in a circle, with the accused, victims' families, and community representatives all given equal voice. Keth V. Mordak stood in the center, his bioluminescent patches dim with shame and fear. Under consortium law, he would already be dead. Under human law, he would face a different kind of reckoning. Sarah Chen served as the primary mediator, a role that didn't exist in consortium justice. Keth V. Mordak, she began, you have admitted to causing the deaths of 47 beings and injuring many more. The evidence is clear, your guilt is established. The question before us is not whether you committed this crime, but how justice can best be served. The consortium observers who had been allowed to witness the proceedings shifted uncomfortably. This was not how justice was supposed to work. Dr. Okafor stepped forward to present the restorative justice framework. In human jurisprudence, we recognize that crime creates wounds. Wounds in the victims, wounds in the community, and wounds in the perpetrator himself. True justice must address all of these wounds. She turned to address Mordak directly. Why did you commit this crime? The question stunned the observers. In consortium law, motive was irrelevant. Only the act mattered. Mordak's form flickered weakly as he spoke. My family's trading license was revoked because we could not pay the traditional fees. The consortium ruling said our poverty proved our unworthiness. My children would have starved. I wanted to hurt those who had hurt us. And did it work? Dr. Okafor asked gently. Did causing pain to others heal the pain you felt? The question seemed to break something inside Mordak. His bioluminescence faded almost completely as he whispered, no, it only created more pain. More families like mine, mourning their lost ones. Elena Vasquez presented the victim impact statements, not as evidence for punishment, but as a foundation for understanding harm. The families of those killed spoke not with demands for vengeance, but with profound grief and questions about how such tragedies could be prevented. Then came the unprecedented moment. The victims' families were asked if they wanted to speak directly to Mordak Velnikrita, who had lost her mate in the explosion. Addressed the perpetrator with quiet dignity. I want to understand, she said. Help me understand how destroying my family was supposed to heal yours. The conversation that followed would be analyzed by legal scholars for generations. Mordak faced his victims not as abstract enemies, but as beings whose grief mirrored his own. He began to comprehend the true scope of what he had done, not just the deaths, but the continuing circles of pain spreading outward from his act. When the formal proceedings concluded, the human tribunal presented their findings. Mordak would face consequences, significant ones. He would serve time in custody, undergo rehabilitation, and spend years working to repair the damage he had caused. But he would live, and his family would not be punished for his crimes. More importantly, the Zephyrians would implement new social support systems to prevent the kind of desperation that had driven Mordak to violence. The community had learned not just to punish wrongdoing, but to address its root causes. The consortium observers were baffled. Where is the deterrent? Demanded Magistrate Zurin. How will this prevent future crimes? Captain Santos answered with quiet confidence. By teaching every being in this community that their pain matters, that their problems can be addressed without destroying others, and that justice means healing rather than just punishment. But what if he commits another crime? Pressed Elder Thekmore. Then we'll address that crime too, Sarah replied. But our research shows that beings who go through restorative justice are far less likely to reoffend than those who simply face punishment. As news of the human tribunal spread throughout the galaxy, something unprecedented happened. Other species began requesting similar hearings for their own legal disputes. The rigid certainty of consortium justice suddenly seemed less appealing than the messy complexity of human approaches. The tribunal's deliberations, which had been expected to last weeks, took on new urgency. Humanity had done more than present legal arguments. They had demonstrated a completely different understanding of what justice could accomplish. For the first time in millennia, the galaxy was beginning to question whether there might be a better way to live together. The revolution had begun not with conquest or force, but with the simple revolutionary idea that justice should heal rather than merely hurt. The revelation came from the most unexpected source, the consortium's own archives. Dr. Chen Wei had spent 3 sleepless days in the restricted data vaults beneath the courthouse asteroid. Her request for historical research somehow approved during the confusion following the Zephyrian tribunal. What she discovered would shatter 5,000 years of legal certainty. "You need to see this," she told Sarah Chen, her voice tight with exhaustion and excitement. They met in Sarah's quarters at 0300 ship time. The artificial lighting dimmed to accommodate human sleep cycles. Chen Wei activated her portable display, and documents began materializing in the small room. Not recent files, but ancient records whose existence had been forgotten by everyone except the automated archival systems. "I was trying to trace the origins of consortium legal precedents," she explained, her fingers dancing over the holographic interface. "Most of the founding documents are exactly what we expected. Crystalline legal frameworks built on rigid hierarchies and unquestioned authority." She paused, highlighting a section of particularly ancient text, but then I found these. The documents that appeared were different, older, simpler, and written in a style that made Sarah's breath catch. They read like constitutional conventions, like debates between beings struggling to create fair systems of governance. "These are the original consortium founding documents," Chen Wei continued. "Not the polished versions that everyone knows, but the working drafts, the committee notes, the actual discussions that shaped galactic law." Sarah leaned forward, her legal mind immediately grasping the implications. "What did you find?" "The consortium wasn't always like this," Chen Wei said softly. "The original system included mechanisms for legal review, requirements for evidence in judicial proceedings, and protections for minority species. It looked almost human." The holographic display shifted to show parallel documents, one ancient, one recent. The contrast was stark. Where the original consortium charter spoke of reasoned deliberation and protection of fundamental rights, the modern version emphasized established precedent and administrative efficiency. "What happened?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew. "Gradual erosion," Chen Wei replied. "Each generation of legal scholars made small changes, always in the name of stability and efficiency. They removed the requirement for explained reasoning because it slowed down proceedings. They eliminated appeals processes because they created uncertainty. They centralized authority because it reduced complexity." She pulled up a timeline that told the story in stark detail. Over millennia, the consortium had systematically removed every safeguard against tyranny, every protection for the powerless, every mechanism for legal evolution. They didn't set out to create an unjust system, Chen Wei concluded. They just prioritized order over everything else and slowly lost sight of why order mattered in the first place. Sarah stared at the evidence, her mind racing through the possibilities. "Do the tribunal members know about this?" "I doubt it. These documents have been buried under 5,000 years of legal scholarship. The archival systems preserve them, but no one bothered to look." "Until now," Sarah murmured. "Chen Wei, this changes everything. We're not proposing radical reform. We're proposing to restore the consortium's original principles." 8 hours later, the Grand Tribunal reconvened for what everyone expected would be the final deliberations on humanity's fate. Instead, they found Ambassador Sarah Chen requesting emergency suspension of all proceedings. "Supreme Arbiter," Sarah announced, "new evidence has come to light that fundamentally changes the nature of this case." Veltar's crystalline form flickered with irritation. "There can be no new evidence. The facts were established before the tribunal convened." The facts about humanity's supposed crimes, yes, Sarah agreed, but not the facts about the legal framework being used to judge us. She gestured, and the ancient documents materialized throughout the chamber, visible to every observer. The gallery stirred uneasily as translation systems worked to convert the archaic language into modern understanding. These are the original founding documents of the Galactic Consortium, Sarah announced. The actual charters written by your predecessors 5,000 years ago. Elder Thekmore's tentacles writhed in agitation. This is impossible. We know the founding principles of the consortium. Do you? Sarah challenged. She highlighted key sections of the ancient text. Article 7 of the original charter. No member species shall face judgment without full disclosure of evidence and opportunity for reasoned response. Article 15. All legal precedents must be subject to review when new understanding or changed circumstances warrant reconsideration. The silence that followed was deafening. These principles were the exact opposite of everything the modern consortium represented. Dr. Liu stepped forward with additional documentation. We've traced the evolution of consortium law through 5 millennia, he announced. What we've discovered is that the current system represents not the culmination of galactic legal wisdom, but its systematic abandonment. The holographic displays filled with timelines, showing how each principle of justice had been gradually eroded. The right to appeal disappeared in the name of efficiency. The requirement for reasoned judgment vanished to speed proceedings. The protection of minority rights was eliminated to maintain order. Your current legal system, Dr. Liu continued, violates every principle your own founders considered essential to legitimate governance. Magistrate Zurin of the Logical Collective processed this information with visible difficulty. These documents, they cannot be authentic. Our legal scholars would have preserved such fundamental records. Professor Okafor stepped forward with the archival verification codes. They are authentic and they were preserved, just ignored. Your own systems have been maintaining these records for 5,000 years, waiting for someone to remember they existed. The implications rippled through the chamber like seismic waves. If these documents were genuine, then the modern consortium wasn't just unjust, it was illegitimate. Furthermore, Sarah continued, pressing the advantage, humanity's supposed crimes take on a different character when viewed through the lens of the consortium's original principles. She pulled up the charges against humanity again, but now displayed them alongside the original charter. We questioned trade agreements. The original charter requires such questioning to prevent the entrenchment of unjust advantages. We challenged precedents. The founders explicitly provided for such challenges as necessary for legal growth. We demanded evidence for accusations. Your own charter makes such demands mandatory. Elder Thekmore's bioluminescence pulsed with distress. You claim that humanity's behavior aligns with our founding principles? Not just aligns with them, Sarah replied firmly. Humanity's legal philosophy represents the natural evolution of your founding principles. We're not revolutionaries trying to destroy your system. We're conservatives trying to restore it. The chamber erupted in agitated discussion. Species that had never questioned consortium authority were suddenly confronted with evidence that their entire legal framework was built on the abandonment of justice. But it was Counselor Vexai of the Trade Federation who asked the crucial question. If these principles were abandoned, there must have been reasons. What prevented the original system from working? Dr. Chenwei had anticipated this question. The original system was slow, she admitted. It required extensive deliberation, careful consideration of evidence, and genuine debate about justice. The modern system is much more efficient. She paused to let this sink in. The question the consortium must answer is whether efficiency is more important than legitimacy. Arbiter Veltar had remained silent throughout the presentation, her crystalline form growing dimmer as the implications became clear. Finally, she spoke. You're asking us to abandon 5,000 years of legal development, she said quietly. No, Sarah replied. We're asking you to remember why legal development matters in the first place. Your ancestors built a system designed to serve justice. Their successors built a system designed to serve itself. And you believe human legal philosophy can bridge this gap? Sarah nodded. Human law isn't perfect, but it includes mechanisms for improvement, safeguards against tyranny, and protection for the powerless. Most importantly, it remembers that the purpose of law is to serve beings, not to be served by them. As the session ended, Something had fundamentally changed in the chamber. The consortium faced a choice that no one had anticipated. They could continue with their efficient but illegitimate system, or they could attempt to restore the justice their founders had envisioned. The galaxy held its breath, waiting to see whether 5,000 years of precedent could be overturned by the simple question of what was right. The revolution was no longer about humanity's place in galactic civilization. It was about what kind of civilization the galaxy wanted to be. The transformation began with whispers in the corridors of power, but within days it had become a roar that echoed across the galaxy. The first crack in consortium authority came from an unexpected source, the ethereal wisps of the Gossamer Nebula. For 3,000 years they had been model citizens, never questioning a single consortium ruling. But Ambassador Lumara's statement to the Galactic News Network sent shockwaves through civilized space. We have reviewed the ancient documents presented by humanity. Her translated voice rippled through subspace communications, and we can no longer pretend that our silence represents consent. The consortium has been ruling without legitimate authority for millennia. Within hours, other species began issuing similar statements. The crystalline hegemony found itself facing unprecedented internal dissent, as younger crystal formations questioned the decisions of their elders. The deep space thinkers published detailed mathematical analyses proving that consortium legal outcomes violated basic probability distributions for fair judgment. But it was the Hive Collective's announcement that truly shattered the old order. Ambassador Kreith, who had been one of humanity's harshest critics during the original exclusion vote, stood before the emergency session of the Consortium Council with his entire carapace dimmed in what humans learned was a sign of profound shame. The collective has completed a comprehensive review of our legal obligations, he announced, his buzzing voice carefully modulated for maximum clarity. We have concluded that the current consortium framework lacks the legitimacy necessary for voluntary compliance. The chamber fell silent. The Hive Collective controlled 17% of galactic trade and had never disputed a single consortium decision. Furthermore, Kreith continued, we formally request that humanity provide legal consultation for the reformation of galactic justice systems. Supreme Arbiter Veltar's crystalline form blazed with indignation. This is impossible. The collective cannot simply withdraw from consortium authority, can't we? Kreith replied, his compound eyes reflecting the chamber's lights like faceted gems. You taught us that authority derives from power and tradition. But the humans taught us something more important. Legitimate authority must derive from consent and justice. He gestured with 2 of his 6 arms, and holographic displays filled the chamber with statistical analyses that would have made human lawyers proud. The collective has calculated the costs of injustice under consortium law, he explained. Over the past 1,000 years, unfair rulings have cost our species approximately 40 trillion credits in economic losses. But the real cost has been the erosion of our faith in law itself. Ambassador Sarah Chen watched from the gallery, amazed at how quickly human legal concepts had spread through galactic civilization. The Universal Justice Protocol, originally intended as humanity's defense, had become a blueprint for reform that dozens of species were demanding to implement. Elder Techmore stirred in his massive tank, his bioluminescent patches pulsing with distress. You speak of consent as if subjects have the right to withdraw it from their rightful rulers. That's exactly what we're saying, came a new voice from the chamber entrance. Ambassador Silith of the Zephyrian Collective entered with a delegation that made the assembled consortium members gasp in shock. Behind her walked representatives from 43 different species, all bearing the same message. They wanted human-style legal reform, and they wanted it now. The question isn't whether subjects have the right to withdraw consent, Silith continued, her translucent form shimmering with determination. The question is whether rulers have the right to demand consent they haven't earned. She approached the central podium with a document that made Veltar's form flicker with alarm. This is a formal petition, signed by 43 member species representing 68% of the consortium's economic output. We demand immediate implementation of the Universal Justice Protocol as outlined by humanity. The document materialized in the chamber's display system, its signatures glowing with the authentication codes of nearly half the galaxy's civilizations. Dr. Liu stepped forward from the human delegation. The petition includes specific provisions for transitional justice, he explained. We understand that changing 5,000 years of legal tradition cannot happen overnight. But it can happen, added Professor Okafor, if the will exists to prioritize justice over convenience. The reformed legal framework they proposed was elegant in its simplicity. Existing consortium law would remain in effect, but with crucial additions: the right to appeal based on new evidence, the requirement for reasoned judgment in all cases, and the establishment of independent review boards to monitor legal fairness. Most importantly, the new system included mechanisms for continuous evolution. Legal principles would be tested, measured, and improved based on their effectiveness in serving justice. Magistrate Zurin of the Logical Collective processed this information with visible difficulty. You propose to judge law itself, he said slowly, to treat justice as a hypothesis to be tested rather than a truth to be preserved. Exactly, Sarah Chen replied, joining her colleagues at the podium. Human legal philosophy recognizes that justice is something we approach gradually, through trial and error, through testing and refinement. We never claim to have achieved perfect justice, only to be working toward it. The chamber buzzed with rapid communication as species representatives conferred with their home governments. The old order was crumbling in real time, not through conquest or revolution, but through the simple realization that better alternatives existed. But it was Ambassador Veltar's next statement that stunned everyone present. The crystalline hegemony, she announced, her voice subdued for the first time in the proceedings, requests consultation on implementing transitional justice measures for our own legal system. The admission sent shockwaves through the galaxy. The crystalline hegemony had been the backbone of consortium authority for 3 millennia. Their acceptance of human legal principles effectively ended any hope of maintaining the old system. We have reviewed our historical records, Veltar continued, her crystalline form dimming with what humans recognized as embarrassment. The hegemony's justice system has produced outcomes that cannot be reconciled with the principles our ancestors claim to value. She gestured toward the human delegation with surprising humility. We request guidance on establishing review procedures for past judgments that may have been incorrect. The concept of admitting error was so foreign to consortium culture that several translation systems temporarily malfunctioned. Dr. Chen Wei stepped forward with obvious emotion. We would be honored to assist, she said formally. But the real work must be done by your own people according to your own values. Human law can provide frameworks and principles, but justice must be culturally authentic to be truly effective. As the session continued, species after species announced their intention to adopt elements of human legal philosophy. The temporal collectors wanted restorative justice for their treatment of younger species. The Rockborn elders sought mechanisms for reversing millennia of accumulated legal prejudices. The revolution had succeeded beyond humanity's wildest dreams. They had not conquered the galaxy. They had convinced it to reform itself. But even as celebrations began on Earth, Sarah Chen knew that the real work was just beginning. Implementing these principles across hundreds of different species, each with their own cultures and values, would be the challenge of centuries. As she watched alien ambassadors eagerly discussing concepts like due process and judicial review, Sarah felt a profound sense of hope. The galaxy was about to learn what humanity had discovered long ago, that justice was not a destination to be reached, but a journey to be shared. The old consortium was dying, and in its place, something unprecedented was being born. A galactic civilization based not on fear and hierarchy, but on the radical idea that all beings deserve justice regardless of their species, age, or power. The humans had offered the galaxy their greatest gift, the knowledge that things could be better and the tools to make them so. 5 years after the Great Reformation, the galaxy bore little resemblance to the rigid hierarchy that had once called itself the Galactic Consortium. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood in the council chamber of the new Galactic Justice Federation, watching delegates from over 400 species engage in something that would have been unthinkable under the old system. Passionate, reasoned debate about the merits of a proposed law. The chamber itself reflected the transformation. Gone were the rigid hierarchical seating arrangements based on species age and power. Instead, delegates sat in mixed groupings, with representation determined by population, contribution, and rotating leadership roles that ensured every voice could be heard. The proposed Mineral Rights Accord fails to adequately address the concerns of silicon-based life forms, declared Delegate Zurin, who had transformed from a rigid consortium magistrate into one of the Federation's most passionate advocates for minority rights. We must ensure that no being's fundamental nature becomes grounds for legal disadvantage. His words were met not with the automatic deference the old system would have demanded, but with thoughtful challenges from delegates representing carbon-based, energy-based, and hybrid species. The debate was vigorous but respectful, focused on finding solutions rather than asserting dominance. Dr. Elena Vasquez, now serving as the Federation's first Director of Transitional Justice, watched the proceedings with quiet satisfaction. Her office had spent 5 years helping species after species confront the injustices of their past while building frameworks for a more equitable future. It's remarkable, she said to Sarah during a recess break. 3 years ago, the crystalline hegemony still insisted that admitting error was a sign of weakness. Yesterday, they presented a detailed report on historical judgments they want to review and potentially overturn. The transformation hadn't been easy. Implementing human legal principles across hundreds of different species had required innovations that challenged even humanity's most creative legal minds. How do you ensure due process for beings who experience time differently? How do you establish burden of proof for species that communicate through biochemical signals, rather than words? The answer had been quintessentially human. You ask, you experiment, you adapt, and you never stop trying to improve. Professor Chen Wei approached them with a datapad displaying the latest Federation statistics. The quarterly justice metrics are in, she announced with obvious pride. Satisfaction with legal outcomes is up 37% across all member species. Appeal success rates have stabilized at optimal levels. Most importantly, interspecies conflicts requiring legal intervention have dropped by 62%. Because beings trust the system to be fair, Sarah observed. When people believe they'll get justice, they're more willing to seek legal solutions instead of taking matters into their own hands. The transformation extended far beyond formal legal structures. The Federation's emphasis on evidence-based decision-making had revolutionized galactic governance. Trade disputes that once simmered for decades were now resolved through transparent arbitration. Environmental conflicts that had threatened entire star systems were addressed through scientific analysis and collaborative problem-solving. Perhaps most remarkably, the galaxy had discovered the power of admitting mistakes and learning from them. Supreme Arbiter Veltar requests a moment of your time, announced a young ethereal wisp who served as Sarah's aide. The title Supreme Arbiter had been retired years ago, but Veltar had chosen to keep it as a reminder of how far she had traveled. Veltar approached, with the measured dignity that had once masked rigid authoritarianism, but now reflected genuine wisdom earned through hard experience. Her crystalline form had somehow become more brilliant over the years, as if acknowledging error had allowed her inner light to shine more clearly. Ambassador Chen, she said, her harmonic voice carrying warmth that would have been impossible under the old system. I wanted to share the final report from the Hegemony's Historical Justice Review. The document that materialized between them contained findings that would have shattered the old consortium's foundations. Over 5,000 years, the crystalline hegemony had made verifiable errors in approximately 18% of their legal decisions. More damaging, they had consistently favored crystalline life forms over other species in ways that couldn't be justified by the evidence. We are implementing full reparations procedures, Veltar continued, but more importantly, we have redesigned our entire legal education system around the principles you taught us. That questioning authority is not disrespect, but responsibility. She paused, her form flickering with what humans had learned to recognize as deep emotion in crystalline beings. I want to personally apologize for attempting to exile humanity from galactic civilization. Your questions were not threats to be eliminated. They were gifts we were too proud to accept. Sarah felt the weight of history in that moment. You don't need our forgiveness, she replied gently. You've already given yourselves something more valuable, the chance to become who you were always meant to be. As Veltar departed, Dr. Liu joined the human delegation with reports from across the galaxy. The news was overwhelmingly positive. The Zephyrian Collective had become the Federation's most innovative practitioners of restorative justice. The Hive Collective had developed collective decision-making processes that perfectly balanced individual rights with species needs. Even the deep space thinkers had emerged from their isolation to contribute philosophical frameworks for interspecies ethics. But perhaps the most significant change was cultural. The galaxy had learned to embrace uncertainty, to see questions as opportunities rather than threats, and to treat justice as an ongoing project rather than a finished monument. "There's one more thing," Dr. Liu said, his expression growing serious. "We've received a communication from the Outer Rim territories. 3 previously unknown species have requested contact with the Federation." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "That's wonderful news. What makes it significant?" "They specifically requested contact with humanity," Dr. Liu replied. "They said they had heard about a species that taught the galaxy to question itself, and they want to learn how to build just societies from the beginning, rather than having to reform unjust ones." The implications were staggering. Human legal philosophy wasn't just transforming existing galactic civilization. It was becoming the foundation for entirely new societies as they emerged into interstellar awareness. That evening, Sarah stood on the observation deck of the human embassy station, looking out at the bustling traffic of the Federation capital. Ships from hundreds of species moved in carefully coordinated patterns, their diversity a visible symbol of the unity that had replaced the old hierarchy. Captain Maria Santos joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee, a beverage that had become surprisingly popular among certain alien species. "Any regrets?" Maria asked, settling beside her old friend. Sarah considered the question carefully. "About which part? Challenging the consortium? Risking humanity's place in galactic civilization? Turning the entire galaxy upside down? Any of it. All of it." Sarah smiled, watching a small diplomatic vessel carrying the first delegation from the newest Federation members. "The only regret I have is that it took so long. The galaxy spent 5,000 years accepting injustice because no one was willing to ask whether things could be better. And now we know they can be," Sarah replied. "More importantly, we know they must be. Justice isn't something you achieve once and then preserve. It's something you pursue constantly, with every decision, every law, every case." As they watched, the Federation Council chamber illuminated its windows for the evening session. Inside, delegates from across the galaxy would debate new proposals, challenge existing assumptions, and work together to build a more perfect union, not because it was easy, but because it was right. The revolution that began with humanity's exclusion from galactic civilization had ended with humanity's principles governing it. But the real victory wasn't in the dominance of human ideas. It was in the galaxy's embrace of the most fundamentally human concept of all, that things could always be better, and that everyone deserved the chance to make them so. The consortium had sought to outlaw humanity because they feared the questions humans asked. In the end, those questions had become the foundation for a new kind of civilization, one built not on fear and hierarchy, but on hope and the radical belief that justice was not just possible, but inevitable when beings of goodwill worked together to achieve it. The galaxy had learned humanity's greatest lesson, that the price of justice is eternal vigilance, and that vigilance is not a burden to be borne, but a privilege to be shared. Humanity had given the galaxy their laws. More importantly, they had given them the courage to make those laws mean something.